context of farming in the city, urban agriculture, etc. So looking at the question of community gardening, urban agriculture, I thought I'd frame this in some questions, especially for those that have seen the presentation before. So first question of what is our relationship, with agriculture and gardens in the urban context? In the United States, we might harken back to sort of the founding fathers and Thomas Jefferson. This is Thomas Jefferson's community garden at Monticello, which looks very nice until you kind of think twice about what the community in that garden was. But obviously, Jefferson had a big influence in planning development of cities. So, the gridded city that we all see typical throughout the United States. But of course, there were gardens in this version of the city as well. So I've done personal research back where I'm from in Indianapolis that looks at this question about what happens with gardens and growing in the city. This is inner city Indianapolis, where we have the grid city, but we also have sort of the conditions that cities end up facing, so density, infrastructure, social issues, and eventually governments started to deal with these kind of issues, and they built things like public housing that were also another kind of garden in the city model, but so much for that. That leads me really to the question of who. When we're talking about communities and gardening in the city, who makes up a community and who is the city for? And this is something that the research kind of really helped me investigate. So there was in Indianapolis in the 1940s, and this is really trying to look back at what was done in the past and see how it worked out. A lot of the ideas that we talk about today, community gardens, urban agriculture, this isn't the first time that this has happened. So this was a group, called the Flanner House, and they were really a social services organization that worked in this inner city context in the 1940s, and they did things with youth and children, and specifically focusing on the lower income and African American population in the city. So this guy was my grandfather, and he was the agricultural director of the Flanner House in the 1940s. So he did training programs, and he obviously loved vegetables, which people that know me know that I don't. But it was an important program, and it wasn't only is gardening allowed in the city, or how do you build and do these things. It was how do you get people to actually participate in it. So they did programs where they would do garden plots in the city. Eventually, over about a 5-year period, the program grew, and it had over 100 acres of land that they controlled, with 600 different garden plots sort of throughout that part of the city. And they had over 200 families annually participating in the program. So it was a huge amount of land that they had under their control in an urban context. They also thought about once people were growing the food, what do they do with it? They need to eat it. But it was a year-round question, so they built a canning facility, a very large cooperative canning facility, where they got, I think it's like time or something, where they got everyone kind of together to can the food and have production. They also taught cooking classes. So in the canning facility, they built a sort of a school, and they had their mock kitchen, and they would bring people from the community in and teach them how to cook and prepare the food and to can the food. So they had this sort of education program that was a critical part of this farmer in the city discussion of not only providing the space and the tools, but providing the education. So you had families involved. They would get their old plot, and they would grow their vegetables, and they would save the money from the surplus that they had. When the veterans from the war, World War II, came back, they engaged the veterans, and they became an important part of the discussion and growing the program overall. They built a large cooperative market, so I guess kind of Park Slope Food Co-op, but back then kind of a thing. They also, once they did all of this work, they said, okay, well, our community, we've got food, but we need to do more. So they got together and figured out how to improve the other conditions, so the whole part of the community, the housing and all that development. So they went to their city planning commission. So this doesn't look that much different from Specter Hall, right? And, they went and they said, okay, we want to improve our community, and they put together a housing plan. They got the sort of money and planning together. $100,000 went a lot further back then, but it was a sort of a capital-funded Kickstarter project where people would develop housing in this community as well. They would build the houses, teach people how to take care of the houses and all of that. So this is an image of, the families literally building their own houses that were part of this fund. And again, these were all the same families that were also involved in the garden program. So it was a very integrated model in terms of development and community. So this is what it looks like. It's kind of suburban for New York standards, but at the time it was, an important kind of urban development model. And the idea is that, this community built that part of the city, and it included, not only, okay, we just built you housing, or okay, we just took care of your food. They took care of a lot of different things within that community. So another question that this research brought me to was sort of when and where and how a community persists over time, right? So urban agriculture is a big discussion, and it's thought of being as a way to deal with urban issues. So I've looked at, this research in this case study of, how it worked over time. So this is that community in 1941. So this is the center city. This was the kind of the slum area, right? So the poor brown people they put, down by the river or floods. Lockville Gardens, that was the big, public housing development that was built. And then this is where they rebuilt that whole section of the city. So they did a watershed plan for the creek to deal with the stormwater and the flooding. They did a school in the large open space for community use. Those were the larger fields of the gardens. So this is that same context today. So the community is still there. Let me go back one. So this was sort of where all the poor brown people lived in the city. This was the core. So over time, you see urban renewal, very familiar story, right? So the highway tore through. This was a university campus, so they tore all those people out. Everything was sort of torn away. This community was able to persist, in part because were a very strong community because they built that part of the city. They weren't going anywhere. But also, the kind of gentrification pressures and things worked out very, very differently. So, Lockville Gardens was changed over to market rate housing, so it's very expensive to live here. It's very expensive to live here. This is the only place where it's affordable to live in downtown Indianapolis, is this community that those people built. So urban agriculture, all these issues. Why talk about urban agriculture? And I think that case study is a good example as to why, because combined with all the different things that urban issues come up with, it shows that it has a way to make outcomes a little different. So some of you have heard this before, but this is the Flanner House's propaganda for their program, and it's called their New Frontier Plan. And it says, what is it about? About people, about their needs, their abilities, the land they live on, the land they till, the food they grow, about the cities they live in, about the jobs they do, how they do them, and about the houses in which they live, about what people know and don't know, and what they ought to know to make America greater still. So, question how? I don't know the answer really, but how do we make the American inner city better? Eat your vegetables.
Thank you, Justin Moore. So we have time for